Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. Today, I am joined by Sasha Bates, who is a writer and psychotherapist who's going to talk to us about your very personal experience of grief. So welcome, Sasha.
Thank you.
I have just read your book, The Languages of Loss, and what a great title. First of all, I guess it's The Language of Loss, excuse me.
No, it is, you were right first time, it's plural.
Okay. So yeah, I loved the title and I enjoyed the book thoroughly. As you know, I've already recommended it to a group of widows who I felt could really relate to your story. So I was just thinking, to start today, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Bill and what happened to him and you.
Yeah, I started off life as a documentary filmmaker and then became a psychotherapist about 12 years ago. And Bill and I have been together since 2003 and got married in 2005. And so I was working as a psychotherapist. He ran his own business, but we had a lot of plans for the future to do traveling and go off and maybe do VSO and use our various skills. And he was very healthy. He was 56, I was 49. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he had what's called an aortic dissection, which is when the aorta basically just explodes. And I won't go into details, but basically we went from one day him being completely fine to clutching his chest, being rushed to hospital, and the next day I was told he wasn't going to survive. So my life pretty much changed overnight. Bill was an amazing man in many, many ways, and I obviously missed him hugely still. This was 4.5 years ago that he died. I found that my initial way of coping, or at least navigating through the shock and the grief that I felt, was to write about it. Having been a filmmaker, I think quite visually, and I also think in words, because obviously as a filmmaker you have to write a script and you have to put pictures to it. And I found that I kind of turned back to that. I was writing down the imagery that was coming to me, and as a way of really just getting some of the tumultuous feelings out, and also just trying to sort of make sense of what I was going through, how my life had completely changed overnight. And gradually that became the book, Languages of Loss, because what I found that as I was experiencing all these feelings that I couldn't really make sense of, I was also at the same time realizing that as a psychotherapist, when I had worked with people who were grieving, I hadn't really understood at all what it's like. It's one of those things where unless you go through it, you don't get it at all. I knew all the theory, I'd read loads of books, I'd done lots of trainings, I've been on lots of weekend courses. So I kind of felt that I wanted to write a book that explained it from both sides, both from the theoretical side, my therapist self being able to bring some of the theory into the book to kind of guide my grieving self through this awful experience, but also for my grieving self to be able to show my therapist self just what it actually felt like beyond the theories, what the real feelings were like. So I kind of realized that there were many, many languages of loss that you could use to both express your feelings and also to somehow navigate your way through, again, things like art and music that aren't necessarily verbal, were quite useful to me as well. And I've kind of brought some of all those different things into Languages of Loss.
Yeah, I thought it was wonderful having that therapeutic lens to look through, as well as your own personal experience. And I mean, as you shared, it's like you can do all the courses, you can do all the study, but grief really is an experiential thing. But from what you knew and you had studied, was there any particular modality, if you like, that aligned with you more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've got a sort of two-part answer to that. One is that I looked at the various grief theories that were just about that, and also I looked at psychotherapeutic theory in general. So if I explain first about the grief theories, obviously the famous one is Kubler-Ross's 5 stages. That's the one that seems to have captured everyone's imagination. There's also Warden's 4 tasks. There's something called dual process, and there's something called continuing bonds theory. And what I found was that the dual process theory and continuing bonds theory were ones that spoke to me much more viscerally than the 5 stages or the 4 tasks. I think partly because they were more complex. They weren't trying to narrow something down into like a slightly limited, restrictive tick box, which isn't what Warden or Kubler-Ross said, but it's sort of how they've been taken to be. Whereas dual process spoke more to what I was feeling, that oscillation between 2 processes of being in denial versus being right in the thick of it, of being kind of loss oriented to being kind of more positive oriented, to being past focused to being future focused, that endless swaying of the pendulum between different states, that kind of constant motion, and the polarities, that spoke more to me than it being a linear thing. And then continuing bonds theory came out of research done by 3 academics who spoke to a vast range of people who had experienced various types of grief. And what they discovered was quite different from the more traditional grief theories, the more Freudian kind of notion that you have to do the grief work and then you've done it and then you move on, and unless you do it, you can't move on. And they kind of said, well, moving on is and this is what I experienced myself, is a slightly spurious notion, because you can actually you can continue the bond, you can take your kind of dead loved one with you. You don't have to leave them behind. They can be on the journey with you, and that doesn't stop you from continuing to live a very fulfilling life. In some ways, well, in many ways, it enhances the life that you go on to have, and it's more realistic than this notion that you get closure and you kind of shut the door and you get on with it. So in terms of grief theories, those 2 spoke to me a lot more strongly than the more psychodynamic original Freudian version, or the Kubler-Ross or the Warden. The second half of what I was going to say, which was looking at psychotherapeutic theory in general, not about grief, that was also really helpful to me, because I kind of realized that grief isn't really separate from real life. It is real life. And at some point or another, we're all going to be grieving. And we all are constantly, in a way, grieving losses of, our youth, our old selves, our jobs, even if we haven't actually lost a person. So at different times, I feel like different psychotherapeutic theories speak to me more intensely than others. So, for instance, when I was feeling the grief very physically, and I was wondering how I could kind of work with that to sort of explore it and release it and kind of give myself permission to feel it, I went back to the sort of body psychotherapy books, and found that really helpful to think about how those therapists view a way of being with yourself. And then when I felt this need to kind of find more purpose and meaning in life, because I was floundering a bit, I read the existentialists, who again have a different approach to what psychotherapy can be. So I found myself slightly picking and choosing between various different approaches, all of which were useful, all of which spoke to me at different times. So that's why it's a sort of slightly 2-part answer. I feel like I've been talking for quite a long time, slightly lost track of what the question was.
I think, like you said, like you just sort of answered it in terms of, picking from a variety, really, that not one was the mainstay. And I think it's obviously you're somebody that loves to read and research. And were you also, alongside that, having therapy yourself?
I had, right straight after Bill's death, I had 10 weeks of just sort of grief counselling, really. I'm not sure that in the immediate wake of a death, you can really call call it therapy, because you're not really in the space to sort of delve deeply. You're just in a space where you need somebody to hold and give you the space to kind of make sense of where you are and to cry a lot and that kind of thing. So I had some grief. I had 10 weeks of grief counselling in the immediate aftermath of his death. And then a couple of years on, I went back and had and saw another therapist again to kind of explore where I was at that point. But yeah, also, I mean, I say that, you know, as somebody who has had many years of therapy in the past, and who was trained as a therapist and has many friends who are psychotherapists. So I was very well resourced in that sense. None of which is to say that it takes the pain away. It doesn't, but it does. I had a lot of people I could talk to, and I knew my own processes pretty well. So yeah, I think had that not been the case, I would have had a more intense therapy a lot earlier, I think. So I think it can be really helpful, but I think just in those first few weeks, all you really can do is cry, but that's useful as well.
Yeah, and have those people in your life that will hold the space for you, right? Like if you've got lots of friends who are in the space of, you know, other therapists, then they're good at that. But yeah, sometimes a lot of people want to try and fix it, or don't cry, or, you know, to find it very uncomfortable in those stages.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I know that I was interested that you had done a couple of retreats, for example, and there was one that was called The Bridge, and I wondered if you'd share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, slightly heartbreakingly, the Bridge Retreat doesn't run anymore, which is really upsetting. I think it offered a valuable service, but maybe something, as often happens, something else will grow up in its wake. And there are others as well, but that was the one that I went on. And it was 5 days, residential retreat in the countryside, run by, there were 2 psychotherapists and 2 assistant psychotherapists who held a group of us. There were 10 of us, and we did various kind of exercises, some physical, some cognitive, around exploring our grief. And it was really, really powerful just to feel that that containment, really, that permission, that feeling that we're all in it together, that it was okay to kind of really confront it head on, and to tackle it a bit in the ways that I kind of was referring to earlier, via different modes, through the more creative expression, through music, through movement. Yeah, it was a very valuable experience, and I mean, and like I say, it's sad that that one doesn't run anymore. But there are others, and I'm a little bit involved with something called the Good Grief Project, which is run by a very lovely couple, one of whom is a psychotherapist who lost their son, and they run. Can't remember exactly what they call them. I think they call them creative grief weekends, where you can go, and the other half of the couple is a documentary filmmaker and a cameraman, and a photographer. And so together they offer this space to kind of use your creativity to explore your grief that way. And I've not actually done one, but I know them, and I know they do really good work.
Oh, as well. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we can also reference that underneath. And creativity, you know, is such a brilliant way to process when you're ready. Yeah. And I was thinking, through your, well, first of all, actually, you were mentioning the continuing bonds, you know, and how that's so helpful, and that we can carry the memory of our loved ones forwards. And I know that you set up a foundation in, and maybe you'd like to share about that, Bill's Foundation. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that can be really helpful is memorializing and creating a legacy, and enabling your your person's sort of spirit to carry on. And that's going to happen anyway through a process called rippling, which is, you know, everybody that Bill ever spoke to will have been affected by him in some way, even if he just kind of cheered somebody up by, you know, smiling at them when they're having a bad day. So, you know, there's every tiny little action they will have done will have a ripple effect. But I think what can be helpful to the bereaved person is to sort of harness some of that and put it into practice. So it might be something quite simple like planting a flower or a tree, or sponsoring a bench, or you know, doing a sponsored walk and raising money for charity. Or I did silly little things like on Bill's birthday, I'd get his friends together and we'd do like a quiz about, you know, his life. Or one year I did like Billy Bingo, where I had like sort of some of his silly little phrases, and we had sort of a bingo game. So you can do sort of silly little things that don't cost any money. Well, sponsoring a bench would cost money, but you know what I mean. But one of the things that I did that is slightly more ambitious, and I get that this won't be available to everybody, is I set up a theatrical bursary in conjunction with the Lyric Theatre in Hammersmith. We've together created this bursary, which runs for a year. We give it to one or two people. They kind of apply, and it can be like a partnership or a single person, with an idea for a play that they want to put on. And we then, over the course of that year, we give them resources and some money and some mentoring and some workshops, and a lot of mentoring and help to turn their idea into a full-length play, which we then have 4 nights on the stage at the Lyric Hammersmith in March as part of what another project they do called the Evolution Festival. And the Bill Cashmore Award play is the headlining play. So not only have they had this year to produce their own work and learn everything about how a theatre works from inside out, they also then have a platform to showcase their work. And we invite casting directors and producers and other people in the industry. So it gives them a leg up and a platform to hopefully go off and do great things in the theatre industry as well.
Well, what an amazing thing that you have set up this in Bill's memory and for the people who get to benefit from it. And I love that it's a creative endeavor, you know, in the wake of the grief as well. And so that is really remarkable. I know, like you said, not everybody can do, you know, something as elaborate potentially, but I think really thinking of these ways that we can mourn. And personally, I don't really love that word because it sounds very sad, but like that we can have this outward expression of our loved ones, like, and this continuing bond. And I think particularly with people who have lost somebody during COVID, ways that they can, creative ways that we can come up with around sharing our loved ones' memories. And that's great. What did you call it? The bingo? Billy Bingo.
Billy Bingo, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Even doing fun things like Billy Bingo. I love that. And then through your process of, you know, this enormous grief that's happened and this sadness of Bill passing, have you found that sometimes the gifts, have you found any gifts in this process, or things that have little silver linings that have come out of it?
I absolutely have, and I think that it's really important as well to think of what those things are. And one of the things I say in both my books, I didn't say actually, I wrote a second book as well, a more practical kind of book of suggestions called A Grief Companion, that came after Languages of Loss as a result of so many people saying, yes, but what can I do? And in both of them, I mentioned that it's really important to acknowledge all the losses. So you've got your huge loss of who's died, but all the subsidiary losses and all the historic losses that come alongside that. And that's really important to really kind of go into it and let yourself grieve and feel the sadness rather than brushing over it. However, alongside doing that, it is also really important, I think, to acknowledge what you have gained, and I call it, the phrase I use is gems in the rubble, because we can't pretend that there isn't rubble. I feel I did, not quite so much now, but absolutely in the wake of his death, I felt like my life was a bomb site, that literally everything had collapsed around me, and all there were like shards of glass, really. But from within the rubble, you do find gems, some of which have been unearthed precisely because of the bomb site, really, because of the bomb going off, things that you wouldn't otherwise have found. And I had so many of those. Would it be okay if I read a bit from, rather than just...
Yeah.
Laura, I've got to find my glasses, actually. So this is my second book, A Grief Companion. And there's a section in here where I kind of talk about exactly that. So it might be easier, rather than me waffling, if I just read you a little bit. Okay. So the chapter title is Look for the Gems, and a quote I start with is, "The wound is where the light enters," which is a Rumi quote, which more people tend to know a bit better as the Leonard Cohen quote of the cracks is where the light gets in, which is the same sort of theory. Okay. A recurring visualization in the early days of my grief was that my life had exploded and I was picking my way through the resulting rubble-strewn bomb site. What I came to discover was that there were beautiful gems to be found within that rubble. Some of these I found despite the awfulness, while some came as a result of it, things I would never have discovered without the explosion revealing them. I call this collateral beauty. Therapeutically, this concept is called post-traumatic growth. We can use our traumas as springboards towards greater depths of self-knowledge, compassion, and connectedness. If I look at my own gems, and I admit it took a very long time for them to reveal themselves, I can say I've discovered the following: a greater sense of connection with others, with myself, with nature, and with a higher power. Deeper empathy and compassion for myself and for others. A sense of aliveness that came with the realization of how short life is, and that we really might not get to tomorrow. I felt filled with the desire to get on with living life to the full and not waste the time I have. Part of me wonders if I was sleepwalking through my previous existence, unaware of just how precious and impermanent life really is. A stronger faith in humanity and in people's kindness and willingness to step up and put their own needs to one side, and my resulting desire to honor that and to give back. A broader definition of family and a realization of how wonderful my friends are. A better relationship with myself. I got to know myself intimately, saw which of my age-old habits were helpful and which were less so. I got to challenge all my established ways of being, thinking, and feeling. When circumstances bring you face to face with your deepest fears, you start to understand how many defenses and distractions you normally hide behind. Then you can start to dismantle them. I became hyper-aware and awake to the world around me. I developed a deeper appreciation of having the time to literally stop and smell the flowers more, be in the moment more. This brought me a slower, enjoyable, and thoughtful pace with a richer and more concentrated focus. A sense of joy in discovering how loved I am, how selfless and giving my friends could be, how humor can be found even in adversity, how creative I can be. And most importantly, from the depths of my despair, I discovered that I can survive anything and that nothing can frighten me anymore, as I've already survived my worst nightmare, all of which gives me greater confidence in my own strength, resilience, and adaptability. So those were some of the gains, some of the gems that I found. But I also acknowledge, and I do say that, that it can take a while to get there, and you can't tell anyone else to look on the bright side. People have to get there themselves, and it can take a while, and there will be days when nothing seems positive at all, and that's okay too. You have to have days where all you can do is survey the rubble and have sympathy and compassion for yourself, that it's not how you want it to be. For all the gains, it's still not what you would want. However, it's what you've been given. So yeah, it's holding both those truths, I think, is the important thing.
Thank you so much for reading that. That was really wonderful to hear you read, actually. And perhaps do you have both the books there? Because I have it on Kindle, so I didn't.
Yeah, that's Languages of Loss. So lots of marks. I've been doing a lot of going through it lately, and that's A Grief Companion. So this is more my story and about therapeutic theory. This one's a bit more practical suggestions and a bit of a roadmap, really, to how you can try and navigate your way through.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect to have both of those to companion one another. I need to get the second one, so I'm glad that you reminded me about that. And I know that you've got another book coming out soon too, which is exciting.
Yes, that one's not about grief. That one actually is going back to something else that I learned a lot about when I was training. I'm also a trained yoga teacher, and when I was training as a psychotherapist, I kept seeing the parallels between what I was doing as a psychotherapist and what I was doing in yoga, both as a student and as a teacher. And I actually wrote my dissertation at the end of my psychotherapy MA about the experience of being both a yoga teacher and a psychotherapist. And I did some research with other people that were both those things to see what a yoga practice could bring to the psychotherapeutic practice. And anyway, it's not out yet, but it got a postcard. It'll be out June the 9th. So my new book is called Yoga Saved My Life, Life Lessons to Take Beyond the Mat. And it's about those parallels.
Oh, fantastic. Well, but by the time this goes out, it will be ready to buy in. Yeah. That's you've been so busy and so creative, Sasha. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. It's my own form of distraction. It's what gets me through. But yeah, not always a good thing to just dive into busyness, but occasionally, can be helpful.
Yeah, and I know that you, in the pandemic as well, you obviously had time to focus on writing. And my last question to you is just a fun question, which I like to ask people is, how would you define the term conscious grief?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept. And I think grief, you can feel so out of control with grief. Well, you are so out of control with grief. You often feel like, you're being remote controlled by some weird force. I think wrestling back the control is possibly a good way of thinking about grief being conscious, which is, I suppose what I mean by that is there'll be many things that you can't control and it will just, those waves will hit. But being consciously aware that that's what's going to happen, knowing that the next wave is out there and being able to try and enjoy the bits in between when you do come up to the surface and you can, smell the flowers, get the gulps of air, and trying to make the most of the time when you do feel okay without the guilt that so often is intrinsic to grief, because the guilt's always going to be there, but trying to say, no, I owe it to myself and I owe it to Bill, in my case, to make the most of life because I get to live and he didn't, and I have to do it for both of us. So I think being conscious of the fact that, yes, it's going to be awful, but yes, you can also live a fulfilling life for their sake, really. So I suppose that's what conscious grief means to me.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much. Well, before I finish, is there anything else that you would like to share at all before we close up?
I don't think so. I can't think of anything that I wanted to say that I haven't. Thank you for lovely questions and giving me the space to waffle on in my answers. It
just has gone so quickly, and I was like, oh, was there anything else you wanted to share? But yeah, you've answered everything so beautifully, and you're so articulate in the imagery and the words that you use, and like in the part that you read about the bomb site and the collateral beauty. Yeah. So thank you very, very much, Sasha. It's just been a joy to meet you, and I look forward to meeting you in person very soon.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much to everybody who's been watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.